أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير الأعمال حي على خير الأعمال الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you know, we are now coming towards the last week or the closing days of the month of Muharram. And this last week of the month of Muharram brings with it the commemoration of the martyrdom of our fourth Imam, Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zainul Abidin alayhim as-salam. And he was, of course, one of those people who was present in Karbala, but Allah had destined that he was not to be martyred on that day. And Allah preserved his life so that he can preserve the remembrance and the message and the call of Karbala and convey it to the future generations of Muslims and mu'mineen. And so as we move past the day of Ashura, we have the remembrance of his martyrdom. And these days are also not a coincidence. We might find a symbolic wisdom even in the day that Allah chose for the martyrdom of Imam Zainul Abidin. That just as the preservation of his life was to continue the message of Karbala, even the date of his martyrdom, soon after the event or the remembrance of Ashura, it is one way that we remember and we preserve the mission and the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada Hussein ibn Ali alayhi as-salatu was-salam. Inshallah, this weekend we will have majalis to commemorate the life and the teachings of our Imam. Today I want to just focus on one of the aspects of his teaching. Imam Zainul Abidin was known in his time as a unique worshipper. The title Zainul Abidin is in fact not one that is given to him by his Shia or his followers, but rather it was the title that he was known by among the broad community of Muslims, the majority of whom knew that he was the son of Imam Hussein, that he was the great-grandson of the Prophet, and that he was very pious and very knowledgeable, and they held him in a great deal of honor, yet they did not consider him to be an imam or a ma'soom. Yet still, when they would look at him, they would say that he is the symbol of worship and ibadah. Zainul Abidin literally means the adornment, the decoration of those who worship. And generally it is the other way around. When we perform salat, it is not we who adorn that prayer, but rather the ibadah that gives protection and beauty and adornment to us. Because worship and ibadah is the purpose of our creation. So when we fulfill the purpose of our creation, we are not beautifying our prayer, but rather that prayer is giving beauty to us, it is giving strength to us, it is giving life to us. And in reality, if I want to do my prayer in the best possible way and in the most beautiful way that I am capable of doing it, then that is because I am worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Inna Allaha Jameel Yuhibbul Jamal. I am worshipping the source of all beauty and all perfection, and one of the attributes of Allah is that He is beautiful, Jameel. And another of His attributes is that He loves beauty, Yuhibbul Jamal. But really, that is just one way for me to honor Allah. In reality, it is the prayer that brings beauty and that brings blessing to my life. But when it comes to Imam Zainul Abidin, then if there is a community of people that is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of their worship, all of their ibadah, all of their actions, they are insignificant in comparison to the amal and the ibadah of Imam Zainul Abidin. Why? Not just because of the superficial beauty of his voice, although it is narrated that his voice was so beautiful that sometimes people would pass by his home in Medina and they would hear the sound of his recitation of Quran. And they would forget what they had left their house for and where they were going and what they were doing. And they would pause and they would just sit and listen. And if you are familiar with the seerah of the Prophet, then you will remember that that is exactly the case with the recitation of the Quran by our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. That when he would recite the Quran, even the unbelievers and even the mushrikeen and the enemies of the Prophet, they would make a bargain with each other that we will boycott and we will avoid the Prophet. And we will tell people to stuff cotton in their ears so that they do not get captivated by his message and its attraction. But then sometimes, after the sun had set and it had gone dark, they would come and conceal themselves either outside of the home of the Prophet or in the vicinity of the Kaaba where he was reciting the Quran and he was worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would listen. And sometimes, because Mecca was not that big a city and there were not that many places to hide, so they would run into each other. But what are you doing here? Abu Sufyan and Abu Jahl and these other enemies of the Prophet, when they had told people not to listen, and when they had bargained and agreed with each other that they were going to boycott the message of the Prophet, yet they found themselves unable to keep away. And that was because both of the beauty of the words and the passion and the beauty of the recitation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you find that attribute was reflected in our fourth Imam. And just as he reflected that attribute of our Prophet, he also reflected the worship and the attribute of his own grandfather, Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. This was what Imam Ali was known for, that he was always engaged in worship, and his worship was unique. In fact, when he spoke to his companions, he would tell them that when you look at my simplicity and my life, you will not be able to resemble me. But therefore, I ask you, وَلَكِنْ أَعِينُونِي بِوَرَعٍ وَاجْتِهَادٍ وَعِفَّةٍ وَسَدَادٍ إِنَّكُمْ لَا تَقْدِرُونَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. You cannot be like me, Imam Ali would say to his companions. But what I want you to do is I want you to look towards my character as an ideal and as an aspiration. Even if it is already understood that I cannot ever become like Imam Ali, I should still look to him, remember him, and do my best to reflect his life and his values and his practices in my own life. But then the Imam says that don't think that I want you to do everything that I do. That is not your job and it is not possible for you. He only had 2 loaves of bread that he would eat in the entire day. Even those of us who may be financially in difficulty, we eat better than that. And he only had 2 garments. When I say 2 garments, I don't mean 2 complete garments, but 2 lengths of cloth similar to the ihram that he would wear for covering his body from the heat and from the cold and from the elements. And even those of us who may be struggling, we have maybe closets full of clothing and shoes, and it is difficult for us even to imagine that kind of a lifestyle. But Imam Ali says, "A'inuni." If you want to be my Shia and you want to be my followers, then help me. بِوَرَعٍ وَاجْتِهَادٍ. Be careful of sin. When I see that perfection of Imam Ali, it motivates me to avoid any kind of ma'siyah or any kind of sin, no matter how small and insignificant it might be. Wajtihad. And we should do our best to obey Allah. Sometimes we sell ourselves short, and when we hear about a good practice, or we see somebody in our community doing a good thing, then we immediately say, well, they can do that. They can afford to do that, they have family support. They can afford to do that, they live close to the masjid. They can afford to do that, they have a good job. They can afford to do that, they don't have small kids. So we make some kind of an excuse that if somebody is doing something good, they can do it, I can't do it. Imam Ali says that if you want to have that benefit of an affiliation with the Imam, أَعِينُونِي بِوَرَعٍ وَاجْتِهَادٍ. Avoid sin and struggle and do your best. What you'll find is that you are capable of doing much more than you think you are capable of doing. وَعِفَّةٍ وَسَدَادٍ. And be chaste. This is a value that is forgotten in our modern society. In fact, sometimes people think of it as being a negative trait rather than a positive trait. And so if I say that I will not stare people in the eye, that I will not shake hands with somebody who is not mahram, that I will observe the highest standard of chastity, then people in this society will not think of that as a sign of respect and humility and character. They might think that there is something wrong with me, or they might not understand, or even worse, they might look with criticism at that attribute. But this is one of the defining attributes of a believer. It is not just wearing hijab. It is not just avoiding physical contact with a non-mahram, but it is a character trait within us that we want to preserve our chastity and our purity in what we think about and what we talk about and what we do, what we say, what we hear, what we see in all areas of our life. So 4 things Imam Ali says: أَعِينُونِي بِوَرَعٍ, avoid sin. وَاجْتِهَادٍ, work hard. عِفَّةٍ, and be chaste with all of your limbs. وَسَدَادٍ, and be righteous and be solid in your practice, in your worldly affairs and in your religious affairs. Take care of your responsibilities and your obligations. So in both the ibadah and in the zahada, or the asceticism and the renouncing of this world, our 4th Imam, Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn Zainul Abidin alayhim as-salam, he revived the memory and the character and the practice of Prophet Muhammad and Imam Ali alayhim as-salam. And that is the point that I wanted to make. If you want to understand how Imam Zainul Abidin preserved the message of Karbala, then yes, you all know and you will hear in the majalis how he spent 3 decades reminding people, weeping, mourning, and reliving the events of Karbala with every sip of water and with every breath and with every moment of his life. But that is not all. Imam Zainul Abidin reminded people and revived in people the practice and the character of our Prophet and of our Prophet's successor, Imam Ali. And through that beautiful recitation of the Quran and dua, through that zina in his ibadah, the adornment of his ibadah, through his renunciation of this world, Imam Zainul Abidin reminded people of what the actual values of Islam were. And we cannot remember Karbala, we cannot honor Karbala, we cannot connect to Karbala only through tears or tragedy. That is needed. But those tears are not because of a human tragedy. They are because of a tragedy that shook heaven and earth. They are because of a tragedy that was mourned even before it took place by the prophets of Allah, by our Prophet, by Imam Ali, by Fatima al-Zahra. They were martyred before the events of Karbala, but they wept for Karbala because it wasn't just a human tragedy. The angels in the heavens and every living being in this earth mourned Karbala because it was part of the tragedy of existence, of the entire cosmos and the entire universe. And that is only possible for us to understand if we have the values of our Prophet and the values of Imam Ali in our character and in our practice. If we don't understand this part of how Imam Zainul Abidin kept alive the message of Karbala, then we will not be able to keep alive the message of Karbala in our own time and in our own lives. We will not be able to preserve it for our family. It is tears, it is remembrance, it is grief, but it is also adopting the practices that Imam Zainul Abidin revived in a Muslim community that had been blinded with the misguidance of the Umayyads and with the wealth and with the power that came with a new empire. And that was the values and the ibadah that we learn from our Prophet, from Imam Ali, and from Ahlul Bayt. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of us wara, or the avoidance of sin, and ijtihad, which is strenuous effort in the path of Allah, and iffah, which is chastity, and sadad, which is righteousness. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى علي أمير المؤمنين وعلى فاطمة الزهراء وعلى الحسن والحسين وعلي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين صلوات الله. In the second khutbah, I begin by praising Allah for His unlimited bounties and seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for myself and for all of us present and all mu'mineen and mu'minat throughout the world for our sins and our shortcomings. In the second khutbah, I would just like to quote one section of Dua Makarimul Akhlaq, one of the du'as that we learn from Imam Zainul Abidin, which has a very beautiful dua and a very comprehensive petition from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَارْزُقْنِي صِحَّةً فِي عِبَادَةٍ وَفَرَاغًا فِي زَهَادَةٍ وَعِلْمًا فِي اسْتِعْمَالٍ. Imam Zayn al-Abidin asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for three things, but he says that I want these three things to be associated with three other things. And that is very important. Sometimes when we make dua, we forget that everything that we ask Allah, we should ask it for a reason. So we ask Allah for a long life. But how many people are there in this world who had a short life and did so much more good for their community, for their family, for humanity, and for their own eternal life than people with a long life? You can find many kings, many very powerful people. They lived until the age of 90 or 100. And all that long life gave them was more time to do evil and to sin. And there were many people who had a shorter life, but they did so much good. So ask Allah for a long life. Don't ask Him for a short life. But ask Him for that life so that you can do ibadah and obedience. So everything that you ask Allah, ask for something. So what does Imam Zayn al-Abidin ask Allah? He says, وَارْزُقْنِي صِحَّةً فِي عِبَادَةٍ. Oh Allah, give me health. But why do we want health? So we can have fun, so we can show off, so we can do whatever it is that we want to do, maybe so that we can be independent. The Imam says that if I'm asking Allah for health, then I will ask Him sihha fi ibadah. I want my sihha to be something that I use in the way of Allah. And that doesn't just mean fasting or praying or going for Hajj. It means that when I have strength and I have health, everything I do, I dedicate to Allah. So you enjoy your life and you do everything that a person needs to do for their material well-being, for their connection to their family, but you do it for the sake of Allah. Your sihha should be for ibadah. وَارْزُقْنِي صِحَّةً فِي عِبَادَةٍ. And then the second thing the Imam asks is وَفَرَاغًا فِي زَهَادَةٍ. Faragh means that you have free time. And now culture and the economy has changed. So think of, especially in earlier times, who had free time? Somebody who had enough money that they didn't need to work from morning until evening just to have a morsel of food to eat. So faragh is not really about the time, but it is about the financial independence. There used to be a word, and we don't use that word anymore, the leisured classes and the working classes. So the leisured classes were people who had money, and they could decide, what do I want to do today? Do I want to go hunting? Do I want to have fun? Or do I want to engage in some profitable exercise? They had a choice. So faragh is that you have enough money, you have enough security in your life that you can choose what to do. What normally happens for those leisured classes? They spend all their time and energy thinking about getting more power, getting more money, taking advantage of others, building an empire. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin says, وَفَرَاغًا. Oh Allah, give me leisure, so that all my time is not spent just running from one obligation to another, so I have clothing to wear and food to eat. But then when I have that power, fi zahada, make me zahid. Meaning, give me that abundance, but make me not want that abundance just for my own self. Zuhud means that you renounce this world. So you have a pile of money, but you don't want to use that money for your own self. And therefore, what will you use it for? You will use it for a higher purpose. Not just to upgrade your own life. No more flying economy class for me, I'm flying first class. I can afford it. Faraghan fi zahada. I have enough, but I want to devote it to Allah. and not to myself. And finally, وَعِلْمًا فِي اسْتِعْمَالٍ. Give me ilm, but make it something that I utilize and not just something that I file away in my mind. Many of us, we like to know things, and sometimes we like to show off, and we might even correct other people when they make a mistake. We have ilm, but we don't have isti'mal. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin, his dua was, وَارْزُقْنِي صِحَّةً فِي عِبَادَةٍ وَفَرَاغًا فِي زَهَادَةٍ وَعِلْمًا فِي اسْتِعْمَالٍ. Oh Allah, give me health so I use it in ibadah. Give me free time, meaning give me abundance, so that I am not devoted to this world, but therefore I can dedicate my resources and my wealth to you, and give me knowledge with utilization. May Allah allow all of us to make that dua and to receive that same blessing from Allah. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. صلوا على محمد وعلى آله.